Good evening, members of the board, members of the community of Victoria. My name is Jeff Davis. I'm here today to present ideas and current situations happening here within Victoria Independent School District. There's some things that are starting to come about with the way that we are handling our school system and how we are trying to provide equitable education to the students of Victoria. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're focused on today. So a little bit to know about this. The spirit and intent of this presentation is to apply financial leadership principles of management for Victoria ISD. The four areas that we are going to focus on tonight are the current budget allocation for the physical plant and support systems. Currently, what we use the federal, state, and local funds. So how those are allocated, how the impact of financial leadership relates to our safe and effective learning environment. So how are we ensuring the safety of students within Victoria ISD, and how effective is our instruction in providing equitable education for all? And then we're also going to consider the five different aspects that go into how we're using technology throughout the district to enhance our service to the students. All right, so right here, these numbers, I try to make it as plain and as simple as possible. What we're looking at right here is the financial data for 2021 for the physical plant and support systems. Now, we all understand that a lot of the finances kind of changed a little bit based upon how much we budgeted based upon previous years, and our attempts at settling up our finances between the April-May time frame and the beginning of the school year. But we also had to consider the different allocations of funds that we received through the ESSER funds that came across because of the pandemic. But we're not going to look at the amount of money that we had. We're going to look at how much we budgeted going into the school system. And then we're also going to consider what the state's currently doing and their percentage of their overall budget. Okay, so looking at these numbers, you can see for the physical plant and support systems, the support systems that we're looking at is the data processing services. So kind of what we do to make sure that our data is being accurately reported to the state. Currently, we use Frontline. Some school districts, though some of you may in the past know about, is probably like Skyward, ePrezo, different things that are intended to be able to process our data into PEMS. So PEMS is the system that the state of Texas uses for gathering data for different populations, different socioeconomically disadvantaged areas, population density, services provided. But we have to contract out every year a separate software system that aligns with PEMS. Okay, so like I was saying about the data processing, then we'll also look at facilities maintenance and operation expenditures, food services, health services. So like health services, like how what we're doing to ensure that students are receiving specific health services within the district. And then the security and monitoring services and transportation. If you look to the right, you're going to see that there's 2 areas that are highlighted in green and 4 that are highlighted in red. So those are kind of negative points, and the green are going to be the positive points. And it's important to look at this data and remember that it's not how much we are spending out of the percentage from the state, but if you go to data processing total amount percentage service for data processing services, you see that for the school year of 2020, one, we budgeted $2,136,486. That was about 1.85% of our operating expenditure for our physical plant and support systems. That kind of seems kind of low whenever you consider what's going on. But again, whenever we start looking at the purchasing and processing aspects that go into school finances, that's something that we have to put out to a bid. And of course, we're going to get the ones that's going to offer us the lowest price that meets the needs of the school district. But if you go to the next column over, you see that the state, they budget from their data processing service, they budget $1.2 billion. So out of their total budget, they're spending 2.05% towards data processing. So even though we are, even though we have accounted this as a negative, as like we're spending less than the state on the processing, this is one that can kind of go both ways. All right. So is it negative that we're spending less percentage of our weighted distribution? Not necessarily, but we've got to remember that the state is also paying for the mothership of data collection while we're paying for the separate entity that just communicates to the mothership. Now, looking at facilities, maintenance, and operation, we budgeted for $13 million for the 2020-2021 school year, which was about 11.25%. But considered to the state is only using 9.89% of their budget. So what's this mean? That means that we're using about 1.36% weighted distribution across our funding than the state is. Okay, the states they're budgeting for statewide distribution. We also got to consider that there's going to be different funds that come from different ways, and we'll cover that later on when we look at the local, state, and federal budgeting, and then the other things that come through with our fundraising efforts and different ways that we bring money in. So we notice that the facilities, maintenance, operations is in the green, but then let's go ahead and look down at the security and monitoring services. Out of our weighted distribution, only 1.27% of our total budget is going towards the security and monitoring services. Even though looking at a weighted distribution comparison, we're spending more out of our budget than what the state has budgeted for that school year for the entire state. What we need to understand is when we're looking at security and monitoring services, there's a lot that goes into taking care of our students and making sure that they are as safe as possible and making sure that at the end of the day, nothing happens to them and they're going to go home to their family just as much as we want to. Okay. So while we look at that, we look at the facilities and security as two things that here at Victoria ISD, we're kind of focused on spending more towards that area. When we're considering those different aspects, we are obviously concerned about the safety and security of our students, but that also goes into the facilities. How are we securing these facilities and how are we making an investment for longevity? Okay. Now, looking at food services, transportation, and health services, we're not doing so great. Okay. Especially within the food services, we only spend a little bit more than $100,000, or we budgeted for a little bit more than $100,000 that year. Right now, we only have 46% of our school district identifies as Title I and receives free and reduced lunch. That's something that we're trying to address right now. We're not having enough people apply for those services, so we're currently looking at the possibility of losing our Title I classification. We are operating at 4% less than what the state does. This is obviously being pointed out that even though we have a roughly half of our student population is falling under Title I, that means that we're not having to pay for these students to ensure that they have proper nutrition. All right. Remember, we want to make sure that we're looking at Maslow's before Bloom's. We want to make sure that we're taking care of the physiological and self-conceptualization of these students, and that comes with food. that's the proper nutrition. But as we consider looking at what's the state looking at, the state's going to have to come in and pay a little bit extra money to those other cities that have higher populations of Title I students. This is just pointing out that the level of income within our city. And then the transportation. We are spending almost pretty much the same, 0.2% less than the state average is doing, and that can be contributed to the small population area that we have. We only have 13,000, a little bit more than 13,000 students, so we're a real tight knit area, and we have plenty of schools that are spread out that service these students, so we're not having to spend as much money on transportation. Okay? So considering those aspects with our physical plant and support systems, let's take a look at the allocation descriptions for our financial data. Okay? We're looking at how we're bringing in these, the allocation description, how we're bringing this money in. Where's this money coming from? Okay? So we have our local a property tax. That's where it's coming from. What is our city's value? What is the property value, and how much are we being able to bring in? Okay, and then we're also going to look at the state operating funds, which that's going to come from our average daily attendance and the weighted average daily attendance for specific populations of students with disabilities. How often we're getting them in here, how often we're bringing them in, and how much of that slice of the pie we're going to get from the state. And then the federal funds, again, this is a very small consideration for the size of our school district. As we see, that's the only one that is in the green, as in we receive more federal funds than the state, than what the state's weighted distribution is. So what's that mean? That means that out of all the areas, we're getting a little bit more federal funds, even though we only identify with we're identifying with less than 50% of our student population receiving Title I and free and reduced lunch. So considering that aspect, this is going to tell us that the state of Texas it's got different areas that are making a lot more money from their local funds, so they're not having to offset their distribution of their funding through the federal funds. And there's areas that are better off and a little bit more wealthier than here in Victoria ISD. But that doesn't say anything about us as a community. It doesn't say anything that we can't afford to provide a adequate education to our students. That just means that we have some students that need a little bit more assistance off that federal funds. So looking at our local property tax from maintenance and operation, we're pulling in a little bit more than $59 million a year, and that's just coming off of our taxable revenue. So about 42% of our revenue that we are bringing in a year is going to be from our local property tax. That's the biggest chunk of property of revenue that every school district is going to look at. Okay, but as you see, in comparison to the state, we're still bringing in a little bit less than what's going on. So can that be attributed to our population? Do we have high rentals? Do we have people who aren't paying their taxes? Or do we have what's the percentage of homes that are owned versus rented? How many apartments do we have? All right, so but that's for a different conversation and different presentation. We're not necessarily considering that within this. We just know that our biggest chunk is $59 million coming from our local property tax. So we're going to have to look at that as we move into the future about how that reflects upon our state operating funds. We're only bringing in about $4 million less from the state. And that's less than what the state is allocating for their budgeted percentage for weighted distribution. So what's that mean? Does that mean that we're not getting students in the class? Does that mean that we're not getting as much money that we needed from our average daily attendance? Is our students not achievement happening? There's many different things to look at. But as we progress forward throughout the school year and for planning for future operations, we've got to consider these different things. Okay. Our economically disadvantaged population is going to determine the amount of federal funds that we receive. So looking at this one, we can see that 16% of those funds are coming from federal funds. But we also want to consider how much we're bringing in based upon other local revenues. How much are we pulling in from fundraisers? How much is the community involved in making sure our students are doing what needs to be successful within the classroom, within their extracurricular activities? We know that studies show that students that are more involved in the community life and school life are going to be more successful throughout their educational career. We're not doing so well in comparison to the rest of the state's average. So can that have something to do with our geographic location and how close we are to the San Antonio, Austin, Houston area? Who really knows? Okay. But we know that we need to do something more to bring in more funds. Are we not, are we relying upon the amount of money that we have from our local area and the diminished amount of Title I students that we have? So can we infer that we have a population that can easily afford these extra costs so that we don't have to rely upon fundraising aspects? Even though we're able to fundraise properly, we probably need to consider these other various outlets. All right, and then the last graph that we want to look at here is for the impact towards safe and effective learning environment. So we have our basic educational services, capital projects, state compensatory education, and students with disabilities. Capital project and expenditures, that can kind of look at why that we have a lower security and monitoring facilities for maintenance operation. Safety is obviously one of our main concerns, but looking at the difference between Victoria and the state, we're not doing our due diligence within the capital projects. We've got to get out there and we've got to figure out how to make more gains towards capital projects. If we're looking at $2 million and that's only 1.35% of our total expenditure category, we're not doing our best to service these students. Okay, then basic educational services. What are we doing to spend towards education, curriculum, different instructional needs? We know that we're bringing in money for $59 million from just state alone, but we're spending $59 million from our local revenue alone, but we're spending $54 million on just basic educational services. That's not talking about the different funds that we are needed to provide our different Title I student projects and offset transportation costs and everything. We're spending quite a bit towards this instruction, but we're spending, again, looking at weighted distribution, we're looking at the fact that we're spending less than what the state the state is looking at. All right. If we're 3% lower than what the state's expectation for basic educational services, are we not spending enough money to provide equitable education for every student here in Victoria? Okay, so maybe even though we need to look at capital project expenditure increase, we probably need to look at upping our basic educational services. Maybe we need to add more teachers. Maybe we need to make these classroom sizes smaller. Okay, we all know that classrooms are starting to get, the classroom populations are growing over time. But if we're bursting at the seams, we've got to figure out how we're going to offset these different costs. Then looking at our students with disabilities. Considering the state compensatory education, we're going to look at the program, and the intention is to make sure that we're bringing students in every single day, even if we can't get them to qualify for our average daily attendance in revenue. if we get them in here for the and they're in class and they're in seat and they're learning and they meet the minimum requirement to be considered able to pass the state mandated test to determine whether or not they are performing on level. We're looking at our at-risk population. Is our at-risk population receiving a fair and equitable education? How are we getting the so we're right here paying $14 million, and so that's 10%. We're using 10 almost 11% of our expenditure to ensure that we're getting these at-risk students into the classroom, getting their education, at least the minimum amount of time in seat. All right, so when we look at that, we see that we're outperforming the state standard. So we need to keep up with that. Our at-risk population is going to work towards closing that achievement gap, making sure that this next generation is prepared and ready to go. And then our students with disabilities. We're spending more for our students with disabilities. We're spending 1.7% more out of our weighted distribution for our state, from the state, or different from what the state is. Okay? That's not saying that we've got $19 million and 14% is being used to it. We're saying that $19 million is 14% of our expenditure. Even though the state's at 12% with $7 billion, looking at the weighted distribution. Okay? So students with disabilities, looking at our basic education, state compensatory education, we've considered that security, facility maintenance and operation, taking care of our facilities, getting our students in, making sure they have a quality environment for education, and looking at making sure that all students are being taken care of. We're looking at those Title I funds. We're looking at our IDEA distribution, and how well we are making sure that our students are getting in here, getting the education. But we need to do a little more. Okay, so looking at how we can do more and how much we can enhance our educational experience for our students, we're going to consider 5 aspects related to the impact and use of technology. We know that technology and the further enhancement of technology within the classroom is really making up differences and strides within schools, but how is it affecting leadership aspects? So looking at this, we want to consider data efficiency to further database decision making to ensure the education, to enhance the educational experience. If we're looking at database decision making, we pay a good percent of our money a year for data processing systems. Database decision. Does the data reflect that our efforts are being are being used effectively? Or can we look at that database decision, or can we make a database decision and realize we're not doing our best? Where do we need to change? Where do we need to make an audible? Then we look at educational technology and accessibility builds trust between parents and schools. Not only do we use Frontline for communicating our data to the state, but Frontline also provides access for parents to be able to go in and look at their students' grades, their attendance, and then they can contact us and be like, what's going on with my student? What's going on with my child? Why are they doing this in this class? Why are they not performing where they need to in this other class? And why does it say that my student wasn't there for this period whenever I dropped him off this morning? Well, that's building trust between us, the schools, and the parents out there in the community. They're able to see in real time what's going on. And then improve the collaboration through digital professional learning communities, or PLCs. It is not necessarily the same as it used to be years ago, where 3 different teachers that teach the same subject all get the same period off. We can't do that. We just logistically can't. However, if we asynchronously go through with different digital platforms and let them meet and collaborate through different shared drive systems, they can see this person's working on this, and then they can communicate to each other. Hey, I see you're doing this. How are you doing this? Is it showing to be effective? Is it not? And then the greater sense of accountability, accurate data collection, dissemination. Human error is one of the biggest problems when it comes to data, because we have to look at the different paper trail. Where's those numbers coming from? Are they accurate? Are we accurately reporting them? So human error is a big issue when you start looking at mountains of paper. But now, with the use of frontline communication through PEAMS network, we're knowing that we can have more accurate data collection, and it can be put out to our staff and our instructional staff, so we can say, hey, look, this data is showing where we're effective and where we're not. Where do we need to refine and reinforce our instructional practices? How do we make sure that our students are prepared? And then finally, the greater communication with students, staff, leadership, and community. We know that the majority of our students are going to have phones, even down in the elementary level. Some of them have phones, some of them don't. We know that we're providing Chromebooks to every student from first grade up. We're looking at the iPod or an iPad inside of the kindergarten classes. We just know that giving those kindergarten students, it's fundamentally inappropriate to provide them with a full-on computer. But as we're going into the technology and digital age, we've got to continue to move forward and provide greater opportunities to bring them to the modern technology and education. Email, group meets, frontline, Google Meets, Google Collaboration, Google Classroom. All these are tools that we are using right now that not only enhance the educational experience, but also allows us to make sure that we are providing a fair and equitable education for all of our students, but we're also being able to have greater communication within our schools. Just so you know, our data, it came from the Foundational School Program. That's from their 2021 Summary of Finances. There's a link that you can follow. Then there's the Texas Education Agency, or TEA, actual finance data reports. This is based upon the budgeted versus actual. Again, we looked at the budgeted numbers versus the actual, because the actual was going to be completely different, and the budgeted is going to give us a greater outlook of what we would normally see on a year-to-year basis. The actual expenditures to revenue with the additional funds we've received through ESSER funds is going to work against long-term data and data decision-making processes. And then if you want to consider further information to look at for Victoria ISD, how we use our funds, what we're doing with our funds, the student population, the demographics, the level of income within our city, and our purchasing process, how we're using technology, and then our accountability system, you can refer to this paper called Application of School Finance, Victoria ISD versus Wichita WFISD. This is comparison to Wichita Falls Independent School District. This is a district that is very similar in size and demographics to us here in Victoria. Okay, again, my name is Jeff Davis, board, members of the community. Thank you for your time.